MyQ security journey is should describe last year and this year intensives towards MyQ security. Together with the external experts, we started a cooperation, and this is a Mainstream Technologies company. Who you can listen today, who will guide you through today's webinar. Of course, it's me, Michal. I believe you know me. I work for MyQ for more than 2 years. I am Chief Business Development Officer, and I will be main guide of today's webinar. Here today with me is Michal Grafneta from Mainstream Technologies. Hello, Michal. Nice to hear you. Nice to see you. Michal is IT security trainer and researcher, also Microsoft most valuable partner, and the professional, and he's mainly security expert. So as I will be guiding you through the webinar, Michal will be explaining all these areas relevant to the security, to the vulnerability of systems, how the penetration tests are being done, and a little bit more about our cooperation between MyQ and Mainstream. So today's topics. We will shortly go through the introduction of MyQ company, MyQ product, and Mainstream Technologies organization. Then we will go through the vulnerability scans, system penetration testing, all these topics regarding the security, how from the eyes of the security expert. And then we will talk more about our common security journey. So what actions we do together, what we done, and what do we plan in the future. I believe you all know MyQ. MyQ is multi-brand MPS solution with a focus on the user personalization, with plenty of features to fulfill the requirements for a modern workplace, and with a high impact and focus on the security itself. The partnership with the Mainstream we closed this year was mainly because of the great event and important situation what happened in the spring when we launched MyQ X 8.2 LTS new long-term supported version, which should stay with us for several years from now, and which brought lots of new stuff. Modern stuff, lots of new features, and lots of new compatibility methods to fulfill all multi-brands and various of customers' environments. But there were, of course, also another reasons we wanted to have independent insight in how the security and MyQ is standing. And we have been also facing, and we noticed the growing security incidents nowadays across the globe. So we just want to keep the priority one, your security. We care about your security and the security of our partners and mainly of our customers. And these webinars should bring more about the educating you, educating the partners, educating customers how to secure yourself against the threats which are coming, and what we are, and show you what we are doing towards your security. And a few words about Mainstream Technologies. So Mainstream Technology, our webinar partner, is a system integrator for IT security solutions. Mainstream Technologies has received several Microsoft awards and is a Microsoft Gold partner since 2008. And since 2021, Mainstream Technologies is part of Solitaire Group, which is one of the largest software house in the Central Europe. Mainstream Technologies focus on vulnerability assessment, identity and application security, and to provide the compliance of the customers or the system integrator, system providers with security regulations and audit requirements. I believe we choose a good partner, one of the top security-oriented companies here in Czech Republic, and we are both located in Prague. And the cooperation is going pretty well, and I hope you will be able to see it on the next slides. So this is not first time MyQ focused on the security. You might notice the previous webinar we organized last year about how to prevent printer fleet vulnerabilities. And the webinar was mainly about the security and the stability of MyQ in the various environments. This webinar is mainly discussing the MyQ features and the MyQ implementations in specific environments. It's available in the MyQ training center, so do not hesitate to have a look again in the case you didn't participate in the webinars or you have forgotten, or you might need to refresh the content. It's still valid, and it focuses mainly on the benefits which MyQ provides to its customers. But today we will not talk about MyQ features. We will focus on the security from the expert point of view, and we will bring several examples which were you as a customers and users facing last year, and also how MyQ help and can help in the future to avoid these possible incidents or risks. I believe everyone is aware about the Microsoft Print Nightmare incident, which happened this year during the summertime, and where actually that the issue was in the part of Microsoft service, the Microsoft Print Spooler, which can allow the attacker to access through the shared devices to the specific environments, users, and penetrate in the company systems. Actually, Microsoft Spooler is not strictly related to MyQ itself. MyQ itself as a product can work without Print Spooler, but it is used by system administrators and IT administrators how to provide MyQ through the shared devices, and how to share the print drivers among whole printing environment in the company. We have provided several recommendations when these incidents appear, how these drivers can be deployed without using Microsoft Spooler, and also how or what of MyQ options can be used for the printing. So, for example, you can use the web upload, AirPrint, mobile app, or email print for non-driver printing. So how to completely avoid using Microsoft drivers, or how to avoid the using of Microsoft Spooler. So still the options are available, and in the case you configure the system properly to avoid such situation, you will not be affected. But we are getting to the topic which is called shared responsibility. I just touch it with this topic of Microsoft Print Nightmare, because this is not related to MyQ itself, but still it affects a user and a user ability to print or use the printers in the network and the environment. And what is important to say here that the security responsibility is always shared. There can be very secure product with lots of security features and with a very well maintained code with all the components and securely made parts which doesn't allow any penetration. But it's very depend on the also the environment and infrastructure setting and installation itself. And in this case, we called about the shared responsibility, and shared responsibility will appear several times during this webinar. Michal, I'm happy that there is a security expert with us, and I would be glad if you also could comment on the shared responsibility, as this is also a huge topic for security experts, I believe.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Michal. So if you look at some statistics which were provided by IBM, you can see that vulnerability of applications, of course, contributes to the past breaches which have occurred, which were investigated by security companies. But most of the security incidents were actually caused by some misconfigurations of applications or of the systems on which the applications were running. And as we are quite commonly saying, many of those mistakes, errors happened between the chair and the keyboard. Yeah, so they were typically caused by users, mostly unintentionally. Unfortunately, in some cases, even intentionally, with malicious intent. So let us show you some more statistics and some more insights into past security incidents, not necessarily related to MyQ, of course. So if you look at the history and at the evolution, you see that web application attacks are very common, and these are among the most common attacks, and their prevalence is rising. Well, obviously, right? We are talking about publicly facing services, about internet facing services, so they would probably be the first target of attackers. And also social engineering attacks are on the rise, maybe also caused by the current coronavirus crisis. Many people, employees are working from home, working remotely, and maybe that also adds to the security or insecurity landscape of the today's world. Sometimes services, collaboration services are deployed rapidly in order to enable home workforce or mobile workforce as soon as possible. But the disadvantage might be that if you do something too fast, then the security wouldn't be your highest priority when doing that, at least for some companies, and I really hope that it's not your case. Looking specifically at web applications and at security incidents related to web applications, you see that the majority of attacks happened because of stolen credentials, because of so-called credential stuffing, meaning credentials were stolen from some other applications, maybe through some phishing attacks, and then they were misused against corporate applications which were publicly available, or maybe without any multi-factor authentication enforcements, and that's the problem, of course. And the second most common source of web application breaches is also related to passwords. this time caused by brute force attacks or basically dictionary attacks. That's a better word for that, meaning the attackers are just trying a set of very common, simple, easy to guess passwords. And if they are lucky enough, they will guess the password correctly and access the system using this identity. And of course, then you have exploitation and command and control channels and some misconfigurations, common misconfigurations of applications. So these are very, very common sources of breaches. Speaking of vulnerabilities which might occur in web applications, there is this very, very famous open source project for web application security called OWASP, and they are publishing a list of top 10 vulnerabilities in web applications on a yearly basis. And they're also providing some comparisons, like what the current trends are and how those trends have changed in the past years. And as you can see, many of those issues, errors, are caused by insufficient access control, authentication stuff in applications, maybe incorrect implementation of cryptographic algorithms, and also one of the very common, most famous mistakes in web applications is SQL injection, LDAP injection, and so on. So that's why security of web applications, especially security of corporate applications, should be checked on a regular basis, or at least a single security test or security assessment should be performed for each and every web application. And that's one of the things I do with security penetration tests. And if we look at how a typical web application pen test would look like, well, it would always start with a planning phase, right? So you need to define a scope, customer expectations, some threat modeling, like what will be simulated during such an engagement, what the expected outcomes should be. Then the second phase of any pen testing attack or simulation would be a reconnaissance phase. So we always need to discover what the properties of the applications are, what endpoints the application uses, what technologies are used to develop and to run, to host that specific application. And then the next thing you would typically want to discover is the list of known vulnerabilities the application is prone to. And that's a very important aspect, because on the internet, you can find many different scripts, tools, utilities, which can be used to target and misuse a specific vulnerability. And there are people who are just scanning the internet looking for a specific vulnerability, and sometimes they just discover it by accident. So it is always good to prevent these so-called script kiddies from targeting and attacking your own applications. And there are many tools and scanners available for that purpose, which you can use to check applications. The most famous probably is Qualys and Rapid7, Nessus, but there are others, including open source ones. And you're always interested in the security of the operating system, what web service running underneath the application, what libraries, JavaScript frameworks are used in that application, whether HTTPS is configured correctly, whether it contains any common cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, whether any REST APIs of that web application are insecure, whether any method calls are open publicly instead of being locked to authenticated users only, and so on. So then the next phase is discovering unknown vulnerabilities with which no automated tool can help you. So it's just manual work. Like you look at the application, you try to play with authentication, authorization, with session management. You try putting invalid data into any input fields of that application. You try to do some fuzzing. You try to insert some random values, long values, some input types with which the developers of that application might not have counted. And there are many methodologies, standardized methodologies, basically checklists of things you should test on such an application to consider that application secure enough. And some of those are OWASP or PCI DSS and others. And last but not least, you have to act upon the results. Unfortunately, sometimes when I give a customer a report showing some serious mistakes, vulnerabilities in a specific application, they just ignore the report. They just say that, okay, now we are compliant because we were required to do a penetration test, but we don't care whether we will fix those things or not. So that's always sad. But normally we do knowledge transfers so that the developers, employees of the company are trained with new security knowledge. Remediation of any found security weaknesses is performed. And then, of course, the application has to be retested whether all those weaknesses have been fixed and whether any new weaknesses have been introduced to that application. Well, but web applications are just a part of the entire security landscape. So another thing I typically do is simulation of so-called APTs, or advanced persistent threats. These are sometimes very knowledgeable attackers, even groups of attackers. Sometimes it's ransomware, human controlled ransomware. So when doing security assessments and penetration tests simulating such stuff, we are trying to go through an entire attack kill chain. Typically, malware, malicious code gets onto an endpoint, onto a workstation, typically through an email or through a web browser. Users might open that accidentally and get the malicious code on their computer. The code might call home and establish a command and control channel, and it then invokes commands which are sent to it by the author of that malicious code. The attackers are then try to stay hidden in the environment as long as possible. They want to implement some persistence so that even if some credentials in the network are changed, or if the computers are restarted, so that the malicious applications are still running in the environment. The next phase is always privilege escalation. So the attackers, when they only compromised a regular user account, local user account, they try to elevate to a local administrator. Then from a local administrator to server administrator or to a domain administrator. They are trying to move laterally across the network from one workstation to all the workstations, from one server to neighboring servers. And the holy grail of any such attack, at least in Windows environments, in Active Directory managed environments, are Active Directory domain controllers, because they govern the security, they govern the authentication of all the other systems. Unfortunately, sometimes the attacks are really, really easy to perform. So even nowadays, even in year 2021, the most common attacks involve credentials, weak credentials. Imagine a web-based application like Outlook Web Access, which is published to the internet, and it's used by employees for email. Attackers might get a list of employee email addresses from public sources by performing some open source intelligence queries. And then they try multiple common, easy, simple passwords against all these accounts, like summer 2021 or November 2021, or maybe the name of the company. And of course, most employees or many employees would be educated enough not to have such weak passwords, but you will always find at least one black sheep in each and every company who has simple, easy to guess password. And in my experience, in most cases, it is C-level management or VIP employees who don't have the security awareness, who don't care about security of the systems that much. And when you compromise such a system, even a mailbox of a single user, you get global address list, you get a list of email addresses of all the employees, you get the entire organizational structure. You are able to upload malicious documents, malicious Excel documents with macros, which could contain viruses, and it is then quite easy to start spreading across the network in many cases unnoticed for several months. That was one of the reasons I created a tool called DS Internals, or Directory Services Internals, for auditing passwords in Active Directory networks. On Active Directory domain controllers, it's able to compare the passwords against leaked credentials, against passwords which have leaked in famous breaches like LinkedIn breach or Adobe breach, where all the passwords, millions of passwords of their customers have leaked to the internet. So it's always a good idea to check whether your employees are using such passwords currently known to the attackers. The next thing it does, it compares passwords or password hashes between different accounts, and you will also find many unexpected anomalies there. There is also a graphical user interface available for that, which we developed together with a Washington DC based company called Phycotic, which generates very nice reports. And the feedback from the security community had been very, very positive. Like this one guy tweeted that he was able to discover that 50% of employees at a company had a leaked password, or domain administrators were reusing passwords against multiple accounts between service accounts, administrative accounts, and regular user accounts. So that was, of course, not a very good thing. Then, once an attacker gets into the network, into the computer network, they start looking around. They start poking around. They perform some discovery of the systems. trying to identify the next targets. And what's quite interesting in this area is that there are many open source free tools available which anyone can run in the environment, including regular employees without any special permissions. And these tools, like this one on the screenshot called Bloodhound, or other tools like Pink Castle or Purple Knight from St. Paris. All these tools can map the network, map the Active Directory environment, and show common attack paths which could be misused. They typically originate from some misconfiguration or from a reuse of computers and resources between regular users, administrators. It's sometimes based on improper permissions, on overprivileged accounts, and so on. So I would recommend such a scan at least to be performed at least once in each and every company which has an IT environment. And most companies are surprised what results they get even from simple, freely available tools. And sometimes if you secure your systems as much as possible, there still might be some vulnerabilities or weaknesses arising from the platform you are using, with which you cannot do too much. This one, for example, is a specific thing I discovered 2 years ago in Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And what it did, it was basically publishing encryption keys of each and every employee. And those keys were accessible or queryable by all the other employees, even by guests in that company's environment. So of course, Microsoft has fixed that issue. Another issue I discovered in Windows Server, I presented at the Black Hat conference 2 years ago, and I even received some bug bounty from Microsoft for telling them about this security issue in advance. And I can now freely say that Microsoft's internal corporate Active Directory environment could have been almost entirely compromised by misusing this issue. So they were quite glad for reporting that. So let's get back to the security of MyQ. So of course we did a security check and a pen test of MyQ servers, of MyQ applications, and this is what we did. So first we checked the web application itself. We were looking into all those common security weaknesses which are sometimes found in web applications, where we were looking into input validation, we were looking into communication security, session security, into information disclosure, we were checking web APIs, and so on. And many of those tests were only performed by hand, manually, and we've also performed an automated scan using Qualys Web Application Scanner, using ZAD Application Proxy, and some other security tools. We then looked at the integration between MyQ servers and the underlying Windows Server operating system. We looked at file system level permissions. We looked at database storage, encryption of the data. We looked at firewall configuration, service accounts, all the stuff which matters with applications. And then we had a long discussion with MyQ about their software development lifecycle, about the processes they are using and about the possible security of the processes. So that was really that was a really interesting experience, I think, for both sides, both for us and for MyQ. So what were the results? What were the lessons we have learned from this engagement? Well, we have discovered several things. I would say minor things in the web application, but what is good? It was the quick response from MyQ, and they quickly fixed the issues we reported. These are some graphs, some statistics originating from the Qualys web application scanner, specifically for the OWASP top 10 issues. I need to know that some of the issues displayed were actually false positives, so that can also happen. The results always need to be interpreted somehow when you perform an automated test. Then
Michael, I would maybe add something to the previous slide you just showed regarding the OWASP top 10. Maybe not of every one of you have noticed that below every picture is written the version which we actually performed the test. So as the external experts we had for the pen tests and the vulnerability findings are actually testing the RC or beta releases before we release this to the market. So of course we regarding the security development lifecycle process, we are very sensitive, and we take care about the delivering the product in good shape. So the part of the security development lifecycle is the testing of the product before it's being released as a ready-to-market version. So release candidates is still version which is a candidate to be the right one, but we are still getting the feedbacks about how this can be improved. We are having a few, let's say, beta installations or test installations, and in the same time, so these vulnerability tests are being performed. So this is a good example how we were able to fix in a few weeks with the RTM release what were the findings of the WASP top 10 web accessibility web security scan report.
Of course, there isn't any applications without security issues. It's impossible to write one. And if anyone tells you that their applications doesn't contain any security issues, don't trust those people. Don't buy their products. And of course, as you can see, it's always better to perform proactive security measures than reactive ones. And what I was also glad about is the fact that based on our feedback, MyQ has implemented some new security features. They've changed some defaults so that the configuration is more secure by default, like the encryption of the communication, like it was something which the administrator of MyQ could have chosen, and it was up to them to enable or disable the encryption. So we said, yeah, let's disable insecure channels so that only encrypted communication is enabled by default, which definitely makes sense. Another thing which was implemented was support of so-called group managed service accounts, or GMSA, which is an interesting feature of Active Directory. It generates random passwords for such service accounts unknown to the administrators. And those random passwords are changed on a monthly basis automatically. So even if there are any breaches, leaks, those passwords will get changed very quickly. And let me just show you an example of such a randomly generated password. It's something that you wouldn't be able to guess in any kind of an attack, not in dictionary attack, not in brute force attack, even if you were Chinese or Japanese language speaker. Yeah, that would be just impossible. And that's why these types of accounts are much more secure. And we encourage everyone to use them, not just with MyQ, but with each and every other service you are running in your Active Directory environments.
Well, maybe take over now, because we will strictly now talk about the MyQ development team and the process. So one of the tests, or let's say discussions, which has been done with together with Mainstream during their assistance and the vulnerability testing, was also the consultations how the MyQ secure their systems, their development systems, the development tools which are used to keep the core safe and the development itself. Michal then can give some examples what happened in the case that the developers or the company doesn't protect such systems. But we are strictly following the recommendations how this should be done. So the developers use multi-factor authentication to access such development systems, and the systems are pretty secured. But also regarding the security development lifecycle itself, there are several steps which are done during the development itself, and this is mainly the let's say following or checking the security bulletins regarding the known vulnerabilities of third-party components which are used with the developers with MyQ application, but of course widely used by other developers with other type of application. These are the Apache Web Server or OpenSSL. So these components are being updated quite frequently towards every time when such security bulletin is released, and the developers are informed. They also perform some steps with the security checklist, which they just need to follow to make sure that they have implemented particular feature in the correct way. But also we are listening from our customers, from the projects where are installed in some security sensitive environments like the banking projects or other ones. These banking projects are running the security audits from time to time. Every time when we receive some of documentation or recommendation, we are trying to implement this as well to fulfill the security standards or current possible findings which has been just found. And the security standards, of course, there are several recommendations and steps we just can follow to make sure that the MyQ is developed and the installer is developed in the right way. For example, NIST security standards, which can follow some recommendations how to approach the Apache Web Server and how to make the right implementation. But not only development, also our quality assurance team is involved in the security development lifecycle, and it's about using the Qualys web security tool, which actually performs the automated tests before every release of MyQ application. So with every patch, we are now using the automated tests just to make sure that there is no any official leak. For the major releases, we every time use the external vulnerability testing performed with the mainstream organization in the 802, and of course we use their consultancy and experts also with the interpretation of the results, for example, of the automized tests we perform. Michal, back to you. Sorry, Michal, you are muted.
Sorry, thank you. So the next thing we had was a discussion about some security checklists, things that should be done by MyQ's customers, by everyone who's deploying MyQ or any other application into their network environment. So first of all, you should use strong administrative passwords. Well, that sounds to be quite obvious, but it's not always true. Always enable encryption of the communication and configure proper certificates, both for communication between clients and the web application, and also between the application, between MyQ servers and any other backend servers, including SMTP or LDAP protocol. So that's really crucial. Then you should definitely configure permissions properly. And one set of permissions is in MyQ's web user interface, where you can assign privileges to different users, and you can just scope the permissions of those users. The second set of permissions would be at the operating system level, because any application is only as secure as the underlying platform on which it is running. So again, in the OS, you will be interested in the list of local administrators, in the list of users of that server who has access to MyQ server data, who can read the database, who could get access to some encryption keys, and so on. Speaking of encryption, an optional feature of MyQ is database encryption. So you definitely want to enable that to prevent any information leakage through some side channel attacks at the operating system level. We've already mentioned security updates to applications. So of course you should always be updating MyQ to the latest version when it is released. And the same is true about the underlying operating system, Windows Server, on which MyQ is running, to prevent any weaknesses, any possible incidents. As we discussed, many attacks are based on credential theft and reuse. In many cases, user credentials, usernames, passwords are just found in computer memory or on computer hard drives. So you should mitigate these risks, apply some countermeasures based on Microsoft's methodologies on mitigating pass-the-hash attacks and other credential threats. You should then also perform some hardening of the underlying operating system. You should disable all the services which are not required. You should disable legacy protocols like the NTLM authentication, unencrypted channels. Antivirus software should even be running on servers, not just workstations. Another thing you could do is allow listing of applications, meaning defining only a small set of software which can be running on the server, so that if any malicious code gets there, it would be blocked. And again, there are some openly available checklists from either Microsoft or from NIST or from other security organizations, which should be applied to the environments. Last but not least, you should always protect your backups so that the security of the backup of the files is as safe as of the production systems themselves, which again is not always true. Specifically in ransomware outbreaks, we've seen that sometimes even backup servers were breached and encrypted by ransomware. So it might be wise to deploy backup types which are resistant to ransomware. On the other hand, even in case of an incident, it's always much easier to recover MyQ print services than other sensitive applications like email or authentication.
Right, I will take over again this part. So we are nearly on the end, and I've also shared with you some polls, which we would be happy if you can answer the questions in the poll. The first questions was relevant whether your company was facing or your customer company was facing some security incident. The second question was regarding if you or your company or customer company was facing the security breach. Maybe, Michal, could you please give us a slight explanation about the differences? What is the security incident and what is the security breach in the right manner?
Well, I'm not fond of any academic definitions, security incident is when a system gets compromised, when someone misuses a vulnerability, misconfiguration in that system, and of course there is always this risk or probability of something like that happening. So you do risk modeling or threat modeling, and you assign some probabilities and maybe financial consequences of those things, and you then always have to decide like against what you will just implement countermeasures and which of those risks are so benign that you will just ignore them. So, but that would definitely be a broader topic for a different webinar.
Excellent. Thank you, Michal. So back to the poll, I'm launching one more as we were talking about the beginning. We are quite interested in whatever you or your customers has been facing the issues related to Microsoft Print Nightmare relevant to the Microsoft Spooler. We have received many questions about, and even nowadays, and this leads to us that we are considering some more steps. We can do this in these terms, and mainly this is regarding the solution we can maybe provide. And we would be also interested if you like this idea that the MyQ can provide you kind of security checklist of your printing environment, including some of solutions. It means that we could provide some set of recommendations or even some automized tool which can then prevent such situation in the case there is some general vulnerability already published, but still there might not exist any official patch. So we would be happy if you can provide us the answers on these, because this can help us regarding decisions about the new services we plan together with Mainstream towards our customers, and maybe some extensions of MyQ itself, of the MyQ product itself, towards the security. So thank you for your answers in advance, and let me wrap up of today's webinar. As we were mainly speaking about several areas, we mainly explained how the MyQ company is facing to the security and what steps are being done to provide a secure product and how to secure our partners and customers. So we explain the development process, the secure development lifecycle. What steps are MyQ doing to provide the secure product to our customers? Michal was widely speaking about the security incidents and vulnerability testing, how such vulnerability testing looks like, how the penetration test looks like from the eyes of the expert of the company providing this to their customers. And we spent quite a lot of time on the describing how the penetration tests was performed on MyQ application itself and how the MyQ application stands. We touched the topic and we widely talk about the topic of shared responsibility, which should be one of the main outcomes of this webinar. It's important to understand that the security is always relevant on the every part of the chain. So not only the application about its features, but mainly the application setting. The environment in an infrastructure setting is also very important, or even more important than the application itself. And also the user behavior, which can affect the sensitivity or vulnerability of whole system is very important. So, of course, we recommend, if you have any doubts, to hire third-party company like we did with the mainstream technologies. And we hire them to provide the penetration test of the application itself. We provide to our customers to follow the recommendation and consultancy which has been done. And we already decided to satisfy our customers even more with some of other services we are preparing to launch, we are considering to launch. So I'm very happy that if I'm checking the polls now, the responses are very positive regarding the ideas we have about the security checks and the tools which can be used to protect your environment, your printing environment together with MyQ and mainstream technologies. So I would like to thank you for presence, for attendance this webinar. I hope you are safe and please stay safe with us. And if you have any other questions, you can use a chat now to place a question. We are ready to answer. In the case you have no questions, this webinar will be recording will be available for download through our training center together with the previous webinars regarding security we run already previously. And thank you very much again.
Thank you.